The sun rose over the fertile banks of the Nile, painting the great monuments and temples of Egypt in golden light. Pharaoh Ramses II, the young and ambitious ruler of the land of the two rivers, stood atop the grand palace walls, gazing toward the distant mountains where the deserts began to swallow the horizon. Beyond the natural beauty of his kingdom lay a shadowed world of rival kings and empires, a world in which power was measured not just in monuments and wealth, but in armies and the skill of commanders who could bend fate to their will. For centuries, Egypt had prospered, drawing life from the river that gave its people sustenance, prosperity, and a sense of divine purpose. Yet in the north and east, across the harsh terrain of Anatolia and the fertile plains of Syria, a power was rising. The Hittites, masters of iron and war, whose chariots thundered across their lands like the storms of the gods, sought dominion over the same regions that had long been under Egyptian influence. Whispers of conflict traveled along trade routes and caravan paths. The cities of Canaan, caught between the ambitions of two great powers, trembled under the weight of uncertainty. They knew that empires were not won in halls of negotiation alone. They were won in the dust and blood of battle. Ramses, understanding the gravity of the moment, prepared his armies with meticulous care. Soldiers drilled in formations refined over generations. Charioteers practiced maneuvers that could strike fear into the hearts of any enemy, and scouts moved like shadows across the desert, bringing back reports of Hittite positions and strategies. The pharaoh's advisors spoke of alliances, of diplomacy, but Ramses's eyes were fixed on a single truth. The Hittites were no distant threat. They were a storm approaching, and Egypt would have to meet them or risk humiliation. The Hittite king, Mu'attali II, ruled from his mountain fortresses with iron authority, understanding as Ramses did that empires were ephemeral, surviving only as long as their rulers could project power beyond their borders. He had spent years consolidating power, transforming the Hittite forces into a disciplined and formidable machine, one that could move faster than the eye could follow and strike harder than any sword forged in lesser lands. Their chariots, swift and devastating, were not merely tools of war, but instruments of psychological terror, designed to break the enemy's will as much as their formations. As scouts reported the movements of Egyptian forces, Mu'attali planned his own counter-moves, knowing that the confrontation looming on the horizon was destined to be remembered by generations. The lands between Egypt and the Hittite heartlands were a stage of tension. Towns and villages, temples and markets all felt the uneasy presence of empires poised to clash. Merchants whispered of caravans being raided. Farmers spoke of strangers passing through their fields with banners that bore unfamiliar symbols, and priests interpreted celestial signs, claiming that the gods themselves watched the unfolding drama. In temples, priests of Ra and Amun murmured prayers for victory, recounting the tales of gods who intervened in the affairs of mortals, turning tides of battle with a thought or a word. The mythology of the land intertwined with its politics, and Ramses was not a ruler ignorant of such matters. He believed that divine favor would guide him, that the gods had chosen Egypt not merely to survive, but to dominate. As the armies converged near the strategic city of Kadesh, tension became tangible. Soldiers sharpened their weapons, polished their armor, and whispered to one another of the glories that awaited those who would fight bravely, and the shame that would befall those who faltered. The Hittites, confident and imposing, moved through the terrain with practiced precision, while Egyptian scouts relayed their positions with a mixture of urgency and awe. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the clash that would etch the first truly recorded battle into the annals of human history. Ramses, mounted upon his mighty steed, rode through the encampments of his men, speaking words that inspired courage, invoking gods, kings and ancestors whose spirits had once defended the Nile's fertile lands. He was both a leader and a symbol, a living embodiment of Egypt's divine mission, to endure and prevail. Yet even in the midst of this preparation, uncertainty lingered. War, the old advisors reminded him, was unpredictable. Even a king could fall to the whims of fate, and battles were as much about cunning and timing as they were about bravery and strength. When the armies finally faced each other, the earth seemed to tremble beneath the weight of men and horses, chariots and spears. The clash was not merely physical, but symbolic. A contest between civilizations that had evolved separately, yet were bound by the inexorable pull of power, pride, and survival. History would remember it as the Battle of Kadesh, the confrontation that would set the stage for diplomacy, peace treaties, and the enduring legacy of a pharaoh who sought to inscribe his name upon eternity itself. But in the heat of that first encounter, there were no guarantees, only the certainty that two great powers had collided, and the echoes of their struggle would resonate across the centuries. The day of battle opened with a shimmer of heat over the plains. Egyptian chariots glinted in the sun, their warriors poised with bows and spears. From the distant hills, Hittite forces emerged, their banners swaying like ominous clouds, their iron-tipped spears ready to pierce through the ranks of any who dared stand in their path. As the armies drew closer, time seemed to stretch and compress, each moment weighted with anticipation, each heartbeat a drum of impending conflict. And then, with the roar of horses and the clash of bronze, history was written in blood and strategy. Strategies were tested, bravery was measured, and the skill of commanders proved decisive. Ramses, at the center of the storm, maneuvered with both cunning and courage, seeking to turn the tide in favor of Egypt. Across the battlefield, Mu'attali's forces demonstrated their own discipline, executing maneuvers that threatened to envelop and destroy the Egyptian advance. The battle was chaotic, terrifying, and yet profoundly organized, a dance of death that would inspire stories and legends for millennia to come. As the sun set and the dust settled, neither side could claim an unequivocal victory. Both armies had endured, both commanders had demonstrated skill, and both empires had been tested in ways they had never imagined. Yet the confrontation did not merely end with bloodshed. It marked the beginning of diplomacy, treaties, and a recognition that even the greatest powers could not conquer all through force alone. The pharaoh and the Hittite king would go on to negotiate, carving out a peace that reflected mutual respect and the limitations of even the mightiest empires. The first recorded war in history had concluded, but its legacy would endure, shaping the conduct of states, the evolution of armies, and the imagination of generations yet to come. The story of Egypt and the Hittites is not merely one of conflict, but of the human impulse toward ambition, strategy, and survival. It is a tale where myth and history intertwine, where gods and mortals meet on the same battlefield, and where the echoes of bronze and iron continue to reverberate across the centuries, reminding us that the pursuit of power, the defense of a homeland, and the desire for immortality through legacy are as ancient as civilization itself. The sands of Kadesh may have shifted with the winds, but the story of that day remains etched in memory, a testament to the dawn of recorded warfare and the timeless drama of empires in conflict. As dawn broke over the plains of Kadesh once more, the battlefield seemed suspended between reality and legend. The footprints of horses and soldiers marked the earth like the veins of a living creature, the dust rising in spirals that caught the morning light. Ramses II, undeterred by the chaos of the previous day, reviewed the positions of his troops, his mind a balance of strategy and intuition. He knew the Hittites were masters of deception, capable of luring even the most disciplined army into traps from which escape was uncertain. Every chariot, every spear, every soldier was a piece in a complex puzzle, and the pharaoh understood that victory required more than strength. It demanded foresight, courage, and a touch of divine favor. The Hittite king, Muwatalli, had not rested either. In his encampment, he studied the formations of the Egyptians, noting the movements of their reserves and the placement of their archers. He relied upon spies, scouts who moved like shadows through the desert, bringing reports of weakness and opportunity. Muwatalli was a ruler who understood the psychology of war. An army's spirit could be broken as easily as its lines, and fear, once sown, could scatter even the bravest soldiers. He dispatched messengers to his subordinates with precise instructions, orchestrating maneuvers that were almost musical in their precision, a deadly symphony of iron and speed. The Egyptians, for their part, were guided not only by strategy, but by faith. Priests of Ra and Amun traveled among the ranks, chanting incantations and blessing weapons, invoking protection and victory. Soldiers drew confidence from the presence of the divine, imagining the sun god's eye watching over them, promising that courage in battle would be rewarded, that the blood spilled would serve a purpose greater than mere conquest. Ramses moved through the lines, his presence a living reassurance, reminding his men of Egypt's enduring legacy and their duty to preserve it. The pharaoh's words were both practical and poetic, grounding the warriors in reality while lifting their spirits into the realm of myth. The battle unfolded in waves. Chariots thundered across the plains, their bronze wheels cutting through the dust like blades of fate. Egyptian archers loosed volleys that rained upon the advancing Hittites, yet the enemy responded with equal ferocity, their iron-tipped spears finding gaps in the formations. For hours, the clash raged, the ground trembling beneath the weight of men, horses, and the relentless machinery of war. Commanders on both sides adjusted tactics on the fly, reacting to sudden breakthroughs, faltering lines, and the ever-shifting momentum that defines combat. In the center of the chaos, Ramses demonstrated a combination of daring and calculated risk. Reports later would describe him as a figure who charged into danger, his presence inspiring his soldiers to hold against overwhelming odds. Yet behind this courage was a mind acutely aware of the stakes, plotting movements that sought to counter the Hittites' superior numbers and chariot mobility. He positioned reserves at critical points, using terrain to his advantage, and ensured that supply lines and reinforcements could move swiftly to areas under pressure. The pharaoh's leadership transformed the battlefield from a scene of random slaughter into a controlled contest of skill, endurance, and willpower. Muwatalli, watching from his command post atop a ridge, orchestrated the Hittite forces with similar mastery. His chariots struck in sudden flanking maneuvers, threatening to envelop the Egyptians, while his infantry pressed forward with relentless discipline. He understood that the Egyptians were formidable, but he also knew that the chaos of battle could be exploited. Each movement was calculated, designed not only to inflict casualties, but to test the resolve of Ramses and his men, probing for weaknesses that could decide the outcome. The battlefield, in this sense, became a chessboard, where each king, each commander, sought to outwit the other while the lives of thousands hung in balance. Amid the thunder of combat, moments of heroism and tragedy unfolded. Soldiers performed acts of bravery that would be immortalized in carvings and hieroglyphs for centuries to come. Chariots overturned, men fought hand to hand when lines broke, and the cries of the wounded mingled with the clash of bronze and the roar of horses. The Hittites, though disciplined and numerous, faced a foe whose resolve was equally unyielding. Every hour, every maneuver, every arrow loosed was a testament to the human desire to survive and to prevail, and the battlefield itself seemed to embody a divine contest between order and chaos, life and death. As the sun began its descent, the battle reached a turning point. Ramses, having assessed the movements of the Hittites, executed a daring counterattack, striking at the enemy's flanks with precision. His chariots moved like living extensions of his will, cutting through the enemy lines and sowing confusion. Yet Muwatalli's forces, seasoned and adaptable, responded with extraordinary skill, stabilizing their positions and countering the pharaoh's assault. It was a moment where human genius and the unpredictability of fate collided, where the outcome teetered on a knife's edge, and where the presence of divine providence was imagined as tangible, guiding the hands of those who would shape history. By nightfall, both armies had sustained heavy losses, yet neither had achieved total dominance. The plains of Kadesh were littered with the detritus of combat. Yet in the stillness following the chaos, a new understanding emerged. This war, unlike many that had preceded it, was not merely a matter of conquest or survival. It was a dialogue, a complex negotiation enacted through force, courage, and cunning. The pharaoh and the Hittite king, though separated by the battlefield, shared a recognition of each other's skill and determination. History, it seemed, was being written not only in blood, but in the mutual respect forged amidst adversity. As fires were lit and soldiers tended to the wounded, the stories of the day began to take shape. In tents and encampments, commanders recounted maneuvers, priests reflected on divine intervention, and messengers carried tales of heroism across the lines. These narratives would survive, carved into stone and recorded in papyri, preserving a vision of a conflict that was both human and mythic. A story where strategy met courage and where the gods themselves were imagined as participants in the unfolding drama. The Battle of Kadesh, though unresolved in absolute terms, set the stage for a new era of diplomacy. Both Egypt and the Hittite Empire recognized that brute force alone could not achieve lasting stability. In the aftermath of bloodshed, envoys traveled across deserts and mountains, bearing messages of negotiation and treaties that would define the boundaries of power for generations. The first recorded war in history had not merely tested the might of empires. It had taught them the value of diplomacy, of recognition, and of compromise. And so, as night cloaked the battlefield in shadows, the echoes of combat gave way to reflection. Ramses would inscribe his version of events on temple walls, portraying victory and divine favor, while Muwatalli would secure his own legacy through careful preservation of his army and lands. The plains of Kadesh remained scarred, yet through the lens of history, they became a symbol of human ingenuity, resilience, and the intertwining of myth and reality. The story of the first recorded war had entered the consciousness of civilizations to come, a reminder that ambition and courage, strategy and fate are threads woven into the tapestry of human experience. As the dust settled over the plains of Kadesh, the battlefield became a quiet witness to the magnitude of what had unfolded. Horses nuzzled at the grass, weary and bloodied, and soldiers tended to the wounded with hands that trembled from exhaustion and grief. The land itself seemed to mourn, scarred by wheels and hooves, by iron and bronze, by the clash of two mighty civilizations whose ambitions had met and met again with force and cunning. In this eerie calm, Ramses II walked among his men, his eyes reflecting both pride and the heavy burden of command. He had faced the Hittites in open battle, he had risked his life at the front, and he had demonstrated the courage and skill that generations would remember. Yet he knew that victory was not measured solely in the ground held or the enemy repelled. It was measured in the lasting imprint of power and influence, in the ability to turn chaos into order, and in the wisdom to know when the sword alone would not suffice. Far to the north, Muwatalli II surveyed his own forces. The Hittite king's eyes, sharp and calculating, observed the aftermath with satisfaction, tinged by the awareness of mortality. He had engaged a formidable foe, tested the mettle of his troops, and proven the discipline and ingenuity of his empire. Yet even he understood that the conflict could not end in permanent dominance. The Egyptians, resilient and resourceful, were not to be destroyed by force alone. Both rulers, separated by distance and culture, now faced a new theater of war: diplomacy. The battlefield had been fought, but the real struggle was to secure peace that could endure beyond the sword. Envoys and messengers began to traverse the lands between the two powers, carrying messages written in careful, deliberate scripts. The language of diplomacy, as precise as any military maneuver, sought to bridge the gap forged by violence. Proposals were made, promises weighed, and terms debated. Ramses offered assurances that Egyptian interests would be respected in the northern territories, while Mu'tali demanded recognition of Hittite authority over key regions. It was a delicate balance, a dance of ego and pragmatism, ambition and restraint. The first recorded peace treaty in history emerged from this careful negotiation, a document that codified borders, mutual recognition, and guarantees of security. In it, the pharaoh and the Hittite king inscribed their names alongside the gods they revered, invoking divine witnesses to seal the agreement. Yet even as the treaty was drafted, stories of the battle continued to circulate. Soldiers and scribes recounted events with varying emphasis, some highlighting the heroism of the pharaoh, others emphasizing the resilience and strategy of the Hittites. In temples along the Nile, priests depicted Ramses as a warrior favored by Ra, his victories illuminated by the golden sun, while Hittite scribes celebrated Mu'tali's wisdom and tactical brilliance. Myth and history intertwined, each account a reflection not only of what had occurred, but of what each civilization believed about itself, about its destiny, and about the role of the divine in shaping human affairs. The treaty itself became a symbol of a new understanding between empires. It was not a surrender, nor a total victory, but a recognition that power must sometimes be tempered by prudence. Egypt and the Hittites, though rivals, had glimpsed the limits of force and the potential of negotiation. The agreement allowed for the stabilization of borders, the exchange of ambassadors, and even alliances cemented through marriage and diplomacy. It was a turning point in the history of international relations, a testament to the enduring capacity of humans to channel ambition into structured agreements rather than endless conflict. In the years that followed, Ramses II focused on consolidating his legacy. Monuments were raised, inscriptions carved into temple walls, recounting the battle in glowing terms, portraying the pharaoh as a godlike figure whose courage had turned the tide of history. Yet behind these grand displays lay a subtler achievement. Through diplomacy with the Hittites, Egypt secured its influence over the Levant, strengthened trade networks, and ensured the relative stability of its northern frontiers. The pharaoh's actions exemplified a dual mastery over both the battlefield and the corridors of negotiation, blending strategy with foresight, force with wisdom. The Hittites, too, emerged from the conflict with renewed prestige. Mu'tali had engaged a powerful opponent and maintained the integrity of his empire. The negotiations and resulting treaty reflected the Hittite capacity for both military and political sophistication, solidifying their influence across Anatolia and the northern Levant. Generations of Hittite leaders would look back on this encounter as a moment that defined the empire's resilience and its ability to balance aggression with pragmatism, a lesson written not only in chronicles but in the enduring memory of the people. Yet beyond the politics, beyond the strategy and diplomacy, the human dimension remained. Soldiers carried the scars of battle, both visible and unseen. Families grieved the loss of sons, fathers, and brothers, while those who survived bore stories that blended heroism with horror. The plains of Kadesh became hallowed in memory, not only as a site of military engagement, but as a crucible in which the fortunes of empires and the fates of men were tested. Myths grew around the event, tales of divine intervention, of celestial signs guiding the pharaoh's hand, of chariots moving like living extensions of the god's will. The boundary between mortal action and divine orchestration blurred, leaving future generations to interpret the events as both history and legend. And so, the first recorded war in human history concluded not with total victory, but with understanding, negotiation, and enduring lessons. Ramses II and Muwatalli II, though separated by culture and geography, demonstrated that leadership required both courage and wisdom. The clash of empires had transformed into dialogue, and the legacy of Kadesh became a foundation upon which future civilizations would reflect, innovate, and learn. The plains that had once echoed with the thunder of chariots now whispered stories of resilience and ambition. Temples, palaces, and fortresses became repositories of memory, each carving, each inscription, each tablet a testament to human ingenuity, to the pursuit of glory, and to the delicate balance between war and peace. The Battle of Kadesh had tested the might of empires, but it had also revealed the power of diplomacy, the intertwining of myth and history, and the enduring desire of humans to create meaning from chaos. As night fell across the lands of Egypt and Hatti, a quiet reflection settled over both empires. The war had ended, but its lessons endured, a reminder that even the mightiest rulers are bound by the limitations of mortality and the imperatives of prudence. Ramses II would continue to rule with the aura of divinity, shaping monuments and legacies, while Muwatalli II would solidify the power of his people through both strategy and foresight. The echoes of their confrontation would resound through history, reminding future generations that the first war recorded in human memory was not merely a contest of arms, but a complex interplay of courage, intelligence, and the enduring human capacity to negotiate fate itself. The years that followed the Battle of Kadesh transformed the lands of Egypt and Hatti in ways that were both subtle and profound. The scars of the battlefield slowly healed, but the memory of the clash remained etched into stone, papyrus, and the consciousness of civilizations. Ramses II, now seasoned by the weight of leadership and the crucible of war, dedicated himself to shaping a legacy that would endure through the ages. Temples rose along the Nile, their walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the pharaoh's triumphs, immortalizing both his courage and his divine favor. Yet within these depictions lay a deeper truth. The greatest victory was not conquest alone, but the ability to secure peace, to bind rivals into a web of treaties and understanding, and to demonstrate the enduring power of strategy tempered by wisdom. Muwatalli II, ruling from his mountain fortresses, reflected similar principles. His empire thrived, its influence radiating across Anatolia and into the Levant, strengthened not by unchecked aggression, but by calculated diplomacy and resilient leadership. The Hittites had proven that military might alone could not dictate the fate of nations. Strategy, negotiation, and the ability to anticipate the movements of an opponent were equally vital. From these lessons arose a new understanding of power, one that would ripple across generations, influencing the conduct of kings and generals long after the bronze and iron of Kadesh had rusted into the soil. The Battle of Kadesh became more than a historical event. It became a myth, a story that blended human ambition with divine narrative. In Egypt, priests told of Ramses as a figure chosen by the gods, whose bravery had turned the tide of battle with the blessings of Ra and Amun. Chariots were described as extensions of divine will, arrows as guided by celestial forces, and the pharaoh himself as an avatar of courage and destiny. In Hatti, Muwatalli's wisdom and foresight were celebrated, his command seen as guided by the favor of storm gods and protective spirits whose intervention had preserved the empire from annihilation. Myth and memory intertwined, creating a narrative that was at once inspirational, cautionary, and eternal. Trade and culture flourished in the decades after the conflict, shaped in no small part by the lessons learned at Kadesh. Caravans moved safely along routes that had once been contested, exchanging not only goods but ideas, knowledge, and customs. The Levant became a bridge between two great civilizations, a space where Egyptian and Hittite influence mingled, creating a subtle but enduring legacy of diplomacy born from the crucible of war. soldiers returned home, bearing stories of valor, hardship, and divine guidance, passing them down through generations. These tales were retold at feasts, inscribed on walls, and immortalized in song, ensuring that the memory of the first great recorded war would persist long after the last chariot had turned to dust. The significance of Kadesh extended beyond the immediate powers involved. It marked a turning point in human history, the dawn of recorded warfare, where strategy, diplomacy, and myth intertwined to shape civilizations. It demonstrated that empires could rise and endure not solely through force, but through the careful balance of courage, intelligence, and negotiation. Ramses II and Muwatalli II were more than rulers. They were embodiments of their civilization's aspirations, their legacies carved into stone and memory, reminders that human ambition, when guided by wisdom and tempered by respect, could achieve permanence beyond the battlefield. Even centuries later, as sands shifted and kingdoms fell, the story of Kadesh remained vivid. Historians and storytellers alike would marvel at the clash, dissecting the strategies of chariots, the placement of troops, and the courage of commanders. Yet beyond the analysis lay the essence of the event. A narrative where human endeavor met divine imagination, where the ambitions of mortals were interwoven with the guiding hand of gods, and where the consequences of choices made in a single day echoed across generations. Kadesh became a mirror of civilization itself, reflecting the eternal interplay between war and peace, ambition and prudence, mortality and legacy. Ramses II, in the twilight of his long reign, would look back on the plains of Kadesh with the quiet satisfaction of one who had faced the storm and survived, who had wrestled with both human and divine forces, and who had ensured the endurance of Egypt's glory. Muwatalli II, too, would reflect on the wisdom of restraint, the value of foresight, and the enduring strength of an empire that could confront its rivals without collapsing under the weight of ambition. Their stories, intertwined by fate and history, became a testament to the enduring human capacity for courage, strategy, and the pursuit of legacy. The world's first recorded war was, in truth, more than a battle. It was a defining moment, a convergence of history and myth, of mortal ambition and divine narrative. It set the template for empires to follow, for treaties to be written, for legends to endure. And as the sun set over the Nile and the mountains of Anatolia, a quiet truth emerged. That even in conflict, there is the possibility of understanding. That even in destruction, there is the seed of creation. And that the echoes of Kadesh, carried on wind, stone, and memory, would resonate through the ages, reminding humanity of the delicate balance between power and prudence, between war and peace, and between history and myth. The plains of Kadesh, though long abandoned, remain immortal in the collective memory of the world. The thunder of chariots, the clash of bronze, the courage of soldiers, and the wisdom of kings continue to speak across millennia. They whisper of ambition and strategy of gods walking among mortals, and of the enduring human story, one in which the first recorded war was not an end, but a beginning, a foundation upon which the future of civilizations would be built, and a legend that will forever remind us that the dance between conflict and peace is as old as humanity itself.